What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about why oil does not corrupt Norway. Why oil does not corrupt Norway. Norway? Are you, is Norway in danger of becoming corrupted from all its profitable, super wealthy oil creation and trade? And I didn't even know that this was a topic. I didn't know that this was a discussion. Why oil does not corrupt Norway. Maybe oil corrupts a lot of other nations due to the wealth. I know Norway does a really fantastic job of using the money and the funds that it raises from selling oil for its sovereign wealth fund, which is worth like an outrageous amount of money for Norway now. It's been invested very responsibly. So maybe that has something to do with this video. I just thought this video sounded interesting. Like, why oil does not corrupt Norway. Norway is just incorruptible. Yet again, another win. But seriously, I think this sounds interesting, so let's take a look.
Possess it should be among. Oil has long been described as a curse. Nations that possess it should be among the richest in the world, yet so rarely do those riches reach the right hands. This graph, for example, shows a clear negative correlation between oil income on one axis and democracy on the other.
So the wealth that oil creates for countries like corrupts their politicians and corrupts like their people, those in power, and then eventually democracy goes down and like good decision making goes down? Okay. But Norway has oil and wealth, but has managed to like become one of the greatest shining examples of civilization. Okay.
This is confirmed by a glance at the largest producers: Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, and so on. The list becomes even more striking when adjusted per capita. Small countries with large reserves, it would seem, are doomed. Except, that is, for just one strange place. Norway. See if you can identify it. On the left is a nation of 5.3 million people. Only 2.2% of its land is arable, making it extremely dependent on oil, 1.7 million barrels of which it produces every day. The one on the right is home to 4.2 million people. Its land is 0.6% arable and produces 2.6 million barrels daily. Which is the authoritarian serial human rights abuser, Kuwait, and which is ranked the most democratic country on Earth, Norway? Now, you might argue liberal democracies like Norway are
So Norway has a lot of similarities with, in the sense that Norway has access to like oil and wealth and like a lot of similarities with that with other countries, but Norway is like maintained like the status of like a super desirable place to live and a place that people look up to as an example of a country. So yeah, that is actually very impressive. And I guess they're going to explain why exactly that is, which is cool.
Protected at the outset from the worst outcomes of oil. Liberal democracies like Norway are protected at the outset from the worst outcomes of oil. Their representative governments ensure they will never become as corrupt, lawless, or authoritarian as others.
Okay, so Norway's government makes sure that like corruption and stuff doesn't happen from the oil.
Norway is not, after all, the only large oil producer to preserve democracy and minimize corruption. Canada and the US also fit into this category.
Right.
But it is perhaps the only one to neither abuse nor squander its windfall. Alberta, for instance, has a similar-sized population, and both invested their petroleum earnings in sovereign wealth funds. But that's where the similarities end. Alberta's fund is now worth $18 billion, a number that may sound impressive but only works out to about $4,000 per resident. Norway's fund, on the other hand, is
Huh.
worth a massive $1.3 trillion.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Well, is this just because Norway is like really, really good at investing? Like where it invests its money as well?
Divided by 5 million, that's 245,000 US dollars per person.
Wow.
Assuming a $3,000 monthly cost of living in Oslo, every last Norwegian could therefore quit their job and live carefree for nearly 7 years if it were all distributed.
Wow. So there's other countries that have had like the same oil and opportunity as Norway, but have not done hardly anyone has done nearly as well as Norway has done with what they were given. So, very impressive.
How did Norway conquer big oil in a way neither Canada, nor America, nor any other country in the world could?
Yeah.
Sponsored by Brilliant. Learn math, science, and...
Oh, I'm probably going to skip this little ad. Okay.
Like many countries, Norway was in no hurry to extract its oil, in part because it didn't believe there was any. Its surveyors wrote in a memo, the chances of finding coal, oil, or sulfur on the continental shelf off the Norwegian coast can be discounted.
I'm distracted by how beautiful this picture is. Look at this. This video is not even about how beautiful Norway is. It's about oil. And yet, they can't... And then they show this, and it's like, goodness gracious, look at this. Anyway, okay, back to the video.
And it was this patience, or rather disinterest, that would later give it an upper hand in negotiations. In 1959, the Dutch made a surprise discovery, what turned out to be the single largest natural gas field in all of Europe. Although most was found onshore, the field stretched all the way off the coast and into the North Sea.
Okay, so Norway didn't even... For a long time, Norway didn't even think that it had access to, like, oil. And then I think it's going to have something to do with this, with the Dutch discovering it in the ocean.
What if, everyone began to wonder, there was more? This possibility was especially intriguing to the British, who were left in poor financial shape after the war. Those long blue miles of nothing suddenly had everyone's attention. There was just one problem. Who owned what? No one could agree on where one country's sovereign waters ended and another's began.
Oh, wow, yeah. No one cared. No one really cared whose water was whose, or where the line was drawn, until enormous sums of money became involved.
And in most versions of history, this is where Norway's love story with oil would have ended. The country is surrounded by a deep, clearly demarcated trench, which the UK could have argued was the most sensible place to divide the sea, leaving Norway with only a tiny slice of the pie, and one too deep to be of much use. But, as it happened, the UK was in no mood for a long, protracted border dispute, and just wanted to get drilling. So instead, they just divided the water in half.
Wow.
Even better, for Norway, the median line calculation included some of its 240,000 distant islands, like this one, 10 miles off the mainland.
Oh, wow. So Norway got a good deal. That it actually ended up splitting all that ocean territory directly in half with the UK. And it ended up having a lot of oil, I'm guessing.
Tiny details like these would eventually generate billions of extra dollars when an oil field was discovered on the border, 85% of which is owned by Norway.
Wow.
With the boundaries now agreed upon, it became open season.
Wow.
Phillips kicked things off by drilling 32 wells, all of which came up short. It seemed as though the skeptics may have been right all along.
Yeah, I don't know anything about drilling for oil. Apparently it's like shooting in the dark, because Norway attempted to build like 32 different wells and none of them had oil? Wow.
There was simply no oil to be found, and it asked the government for permission to give up. But while many countries stipulate an amount of money to be spent in exchange for drilling rights, Norway was smarter, mandating a minimum total depth. So, having not fulfilled its contract, Phillips gave it one last shot. And sure enough, this final 33rd well struck gold. Then came the real test. With the smell of money fresh in the air, in came the American giants, who had a reputation for contributing very little to the economies they drilled in.
Ugh.
They would drop in, take the loot, and vanish, leaving hardly a trace. Some even forbid their workers from wearing non-American made boots. Norway was David to the oil company's Goliath. But it wasn't flying blind. Two major lessons shaped its approach. First, they had seen in the Netherlands how damaging oil could be to the rest of the economy.
Oh, so now we're getting into like the early days of drilling for oil in Norway. What set them apart, like at the very beginning, the things that they did right to end up as like a global leader now in the future.
It even has a name, Dutch disease, for when the local currency appreciates, lowering the country's competitiveness, ultimately doing more harm than good. Second, its government had learned firsthand how to deal with big corporations decades earlier, when it developed the nation's vast hydroelectric grid. All of this foresight paid off handsomely. While the Americans bullied the UK into giving its companies equal treatment under the law, in Norway, the government was firmly in charge. Oil
Wow, okay. I didn't actually know that America had like a history of being like oil bullies in a sense. That is not something that they like to teach in America.
in its mind, was not just another product to tax, but belonged to the public, who could rent it.
Oh, wait. Hold on. What did he say?
Was not just the way the government was firmly in charge. Oil, in its mind, was not just another product to tax, but belonged to the public, who could rent it to private companies in exchange for their help in extracting it.
Huh.
The conceptual starting point for taxation, therefore, was 100%, not 0. Today, oil is subject to the ordinary 22% corporate tax rate and a special tax of 56%, for a combined 78%.
Oh.
And while the state keeps the vast majority of the profit, it does so only after a discovery is made. Private companies pay for their own exploration. Finally, the Norwegian government wisely saw oil as a means to an end, not an end itself. It never assumed, as others did, that petroleum would naturally bring jobs. It knew it had to create them, and to do that, it needed to ensure the oil flowed through Norway.
Okay. Yes, that's a huge like observation on Norway's part. To be like, we can use this oil to generate like jobs and help Norway, or you can be like everyone else who just uses it as like, okay, this will make us money, 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 and I want to be in control of it and this and that. But Norway was immediately like, how can this help people, Norwegian people?
This was no easy feat. To get the oil on land, it first needed to cross the deep Norwegian trench, navigate its winding fjords, and be accompanied by remote roads, pumps, and plants. But it was also an opportunity. Just as labor-intensive manufacturing allowed Southeast Asia to quickly industrialize and shift to better, more profitable sectors, oil helped develop the wider Norwegian economy. State workers were instructed to learn from their foreign counterparts, to copy and eventually overtake them. Today, Norwegian labor may be among the world's most expensive, but
Oh, wow. So Norway like didn't just start drilling for oil, like they became the oil business and learned how to do the oil business themselves. And now they're like some of the best in the world at that, which makes sense.
it's also among the world's best. An estimated 200,000 people, or 1 in every 14 workers in the country, are employed as a result of the industry.
Wow.
And yet, it never got carried away.
Huh.
Knowing full well that this non-renewable resource would eventually run out,
Right.
Norway self-imposed a limit of 90 million tons each year.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is so important as well. Like, it's oil. It's gonna run out. It's gonna end. That is so important to acknowledge. And then a limit on how much oil. Wow, so that'll make it last much, much longer, the whole industry, which apparently a lot of Norwegians rely on for like a job. Wow, wow, so smart.
patience was paramount. Not everything went smoothly. There were hundreds of helicopter crashes, diving incidents, fires, and spills. In 1980, a drilling rig capsized, killing 123 people.
Wow.
It was a costly and tragic wake-up call to the industry's poor regulations. And when the money first began trickling in, it wasn't sure what exactly to do with it all. Between 1976 and 80, oil revenue increased by a factor of 15, which led only to inflation.
So even at the beginning for Norway, even Norway was like, whoa, we've never had like this kind of money rolling in. And then obviously Norway ended up making like the right decisions moving on.
When oil prices collapsed in 1986, Norway fell into a recession. Something had to change. The solution, of course, was to diversify. In 1990, it created the Government Pension Fund Global, today the
Right.
single largest sovereign wealth fund.
Right.
It owns 1.5% of all public companies on the planet.
Wow.
All government oil revenue is invested in the portfolio, which
What? Oh my gosh, this thing is insane. This fund? 1.5% of all companies on Earth? What?
helps reduce the country's dependence on oil prices. But what, you might ask, prevents a populist party from recklessly spending it all? Wouldn't voters reward politicians for distributing it today rather than prudently saving it for tomorrow? To prevent this, it established a rule that spending can only be as high as the expected return, which today is set at 3%.
Wow. Wow. Norway has so much. It's like so. Gosh, so diligent. So like setting laws in place to make sure that Norway doesn't do anything like dumb or like make bad decisions in the future. Like Norway places a lot of limitations on itself to show like to take things slowly and not make sure it doesn't spend like outrageous amounts of money on things that won't generate a return. Like that is such like good personal control and diligence. That's like so good.
Norway's path to the present was far from perfect. Luck was also involved. But it can say what few other nations can, that it converted a short-term finite resource into lasting generational and widely felt prosperity.
Exactly.
Critics argue oil has nevertheless distorted the economy, as felt in the country's high housing prices, or its disinterest in developing offshore wind farms.
I mean, it's definitely true that Norway, like Norwegians on average, are wealthy. They're wealthier than the rest of the world. Is that have something to like the great wealth? Like that has to have something to do with like the amazing oil and like the sovereign wealth fund and all of that. So that has driven housing costs up. But it's like if your if your problem is that you're doing too good of a job like at making money as a country, it's like that's a pretty good problem to have.
Like its neighbor, Denmark. Valid as these arguments may be, they also reflect Norway's tremendous successes.
Yeah.
Other nations look at its problems more with envy than pity.
Yeah.
One question, however, casts a dark shadow over the country's achievements. Norway has no doubt been good to itself, but has it been good to the world?
Oh.
After the state oil company removed the word oil from its name in 2018, one wonders whether Norway's lack of ostentation, the skyscrapers of Saudi Arabia, or Dubai's ski slopes in the desert, isn't mere modesty, but actually embarrassment. Unique among its oil peers, Norway aspires, at least, to good stewardship. Last year, 75% of new non-commercial car sales were electric.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, this is just another thing in favor of Norway, right? The things that Norway chooses to spend its money on are pretty good. Electric cars.
Far more than any other country. And nearly all of its electricity is derived from renewable energy, mostly hydropower. Most ironically, its oil fund refuses to invest in fossil fuel companies.
Yeah,
Though,
wow.
make no mistake, this financial strategy helps hedge against the price of oil. The central bank says so itself. All of these green initiatives may give the casual observer the impression that Norway is gradually transitioning to a post-oil economy. The truth, however, is very different. Far from slowly diminishing, production is actually expected to increase, and that's according to the government.
Well, I honestly, oil has clearly been a very, very important part of Norway and Norway's wealth. And so I think it's understandable that that is going to continue to be an important aspect of Norway's wealth in the future. So I don't necessarily blame them for that. It's just, it's nice to see that they're at least thinking about, that Norway is thinking about how oil production will end eventually. It's finite resource. So at least they're thinking about that. I mean, that's a lot better than most other countries.
The country's newly elected coalition leader has firmly rejected a complete cutoff of oil, and like many voters, prefers a more moderate approach. Oil's share of GDP, exports, and state revenues over time confirm that the commodity remains a critical part of the economy, and will continue to be for many years to come.
Oh, are they talking about the fact that Norway still uses oil? Like in Norway? Well, I don't think anybody's expecting Norway to go completely 100% without oil, like 100% green, like now. That's going to take a lot of time. I don't think that's unreasonable.
In 2006 and 10, it reached new agreements with the UN and Russia to expand its maritime zone, which is now 6.6 million square kilometers, 17 times its land area and over twice the size of India. And as Norway's own oil melts the ice in the Arctic, making exploration there easier, it will only be further encouraged to extract even more oil from it. If Norway, one of the richest places on Earth, the poster boy of environmentalism, with a first-hand view of the beauty of nature, and financially secure for decades to come, feels no sense of urgency, it's unlikely to be found anywhere else.
Okay. Okay. I get maybe this is like the one criticism that since this has been working very well for Norway and they've managed oil very responsibly. But Norway is not yet willing to like give up on drilling for oil and making money off of oil. It's not willing to do that, and I think that's just one of the realities of the world. Like I get it, I get it. So eventually, I suppose it will all run out, but Norway is trying to make it last as long as possible. So is everyone else in the world is going to be doing this. So yeah, it's a little bit of a contradiction of how green Norway is, yet wants to continue and increase oil production for years to come. But it's like, what are you going to do? There's some realities of the world that you have to face.
Rather than search inward for sheer will, the world needs practical solutions. And you, as someone who clearly enjoys learning about the world, are the perfect person to find them. Which you can start doing with today's sponsor.
Oh.
Brilliant.
That's another sponsor. Okay. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Wow. This was by Polymatter. I liked it. That was really interesting. Mostly just saying what a fantastic job Norway has done managing like its wealth and its oil, especially compared to, I didn't realize this, compared to a lot of other nations in the world that have been given similar circumstances, similar wealth and opportunity. They've all kind of squandered it or not helped out their people very much, whereas Norway has. So that's great. That's actually really great to see. Anyway, I like this. If you liked this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Norway, Norwegian culture, stuff in Norway that I've never seen, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.